Hi and welcome to my video. Today I wanted to film my wrap up for January and February. I kind of had a break from filming booktube. I was feeling super unmotivated and so I didn't really film anything at all in February, and I think I only filmed like one video in January. So I didn't do my wrap-ups. So these are all the books I've been reading recently. So I've got a little stack that I have 14 books to talk about. I think I read 6 in January and 8, is that maths? 8 in February. So I'm just gonna quickly go through them. It's quite a lot of books. It's a lot to talk about, so I'm just gonna like whiz through them, give some thoughts, give my star ratings, and a little synopsis. So in January I read actually quite a lot of poetry. I'm gonna go through them in chronological order of my reading. So the first thing I read in January was And Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. I did a review of this book. It is one of my all-time favourite poetry collections. It is amazing. Maya Angelou is an absolute goddess. Like, she's amazing. She knows how to get me. She gets me in the feels every time. And I just love her. So obviously this book was a 5-star for me. I've annotated it to death. The next poetry book I read was Once by Alice Walker. Here it is. This is a used copy. I actually had to rebind this copy because the glue had like just crumbled and all the pages fell out of the cover, so I had to buy some like binding glue and glue it back together myself. I was a little bit disappointed with this actually. Alice Walker wrote The Colour Purple, if you didn't know who she is, and The Colour Purple is like one of my all-time favourite books forever. I absolutely adore it. So I was really excited to read her poetry. I didn't know she wrote poetry until I was just browsing a used book website and I just saw it and I thought that's amazing. But this collection just didn't get me. A lot of it was talking about her experiences when she went to visit Africa, and yeah, I don't know, it just didn't get me. There were a few poems that I did really like. My favourite poem of this collection was To the Man in the Yellow Terry. I also liked What Ovid Taught Me and Ballad of the Brown Girl, but The Man in the Yellow Terry was my favourite poem of the collection. It's not bad per se, it just wasn't for me. It just didn't. Poetry is very personal, isn't it? And it just didn't get me. So I gave it 2 stars, unfortunately. Next was another slightly disappointing poetry collection for me. It was There Are More Beautiful Things Than Beyonce. Now this cover I adore. Look at it. It's just like, I don't know, I love it. I think it's so raw and real, and I just love that cover. So I was really excited to read this because I saw the cover. I had no idea what the collection was kind of like about. It just, yeah, again, it just didn't get me. I gave it 2.5 stars. It just, I don't know, I just didn't feel super connected to the poems. There was a few lines and a few poems that I did feel connected to, but overall, I don't know, I just didn't, I don't know, vibe with it, is that the word? It just wasn't for me. Next is quite a specific book that I read, it is Trail and Fell Running in the Yorkshire Dales. I live in Yorkshire, so as part of my ultramarathon training, I thought I'd buy this book and sort of pick out some runs. It is amazing, this book. It was written by Pete Ellwood, so if you have any interest in visiting the Yorkshire Dales and want to check out some of the trails, obviously you don't have to run on them, you can walk on them. And he details like 40 different runs throughout the whole of the Yorkshire Dales, and they all have GPX maps you can download. They have like maps in here, and it has like the details of it, the little waypoints. Each one is explained in detail, like where to go, things to look out for, like it's the elevation, the distance. It's super interesting. I went through the whole thing and I marked which ones would be good, and like with yellow tabs being easier and like going up to red tabs, which is like the harder sounding runs. Yeah, and it's just super interesting, very specific, because if you live anywhere else in the world and you're never going to visit England or the Dales, you're not going to read it. But if you are in England or want to visit, it's a super useful book. And yeah, it's just exactly what I needed. So 5 stars. Well done, Pete. Really, really useful. So next I read Love's Executioner by Irvin Yalom. Another one of my favourite books of all time. This was a reread for me. I did a review about it as well. Irvin Yalom is an absolute master. He is a psychiatrist in America. He is a existential psychotherapist. He does a lot of psychotherapy with his he used to with his clients. He's retiring now, so he doesn't do long-term work anymore. But I was lucky and privileged enough to be able to attend an online conference with him recently, with 10,000 other people, obviously, so it wasn't just like me and him. I wish it was. And it was amazing. And he's talking about his new book, which I'm currently reading, which is called A Matter of Death and Life. And it's so good. His writing is the most influential. Love's Executioner is him recalling tales of psychotherapy with his clients. It's 10 clients that he's worked with. This was written in like the 80s, was it? Late 70s? Early 80s? I can't remember. And it's him talking about just these encounters with clients and yeah, what happened, and I don't know how to explain it, just how they influenced him, his thoughts. It's mainly about him, his process with the clients, than it is about them. But it's just so interesting and insightful. It gives you a lot to think about in terms of your own sort of stuff and how you view death and how you view just the meaning you put on life and how you cope with stuff. He writes so beautifully. It's like a story, even though it's non-fiction. Like I said in my review, he's just so good. It's just so worth the read. Even if you have no interest in going to have counselling or psychotherapy, if you're not a therapist, it's still worth the read just because his writing is so beautiful, and it will literally give you so much to think about. Like, you'll finish the book and be like, oh my god, I have so much to think about. It's just, yeah, I can't plug it enough. It's just like, read it. It's amazing. 5 stars, always will be. I love him. He's the best. Okie dokie. So the last book I read in January was Hood Feminism by Mikki Kendall. So this was a bit of a weird one for me because I really enjoyed it. It's super useful. Obviously, it's about black feminism for people of colour, and so obviously I was really interested as like a black woman, as a black British woman, as someone that I would consider myself a feminist. I was really interested in reading this and learning some things and maybe have my eyes opened a little bit. One thing that kind of became apparent is I was questioning how much was applicable to British culture, because what she talks about, obviously she's talking about America, she's talking about growing up where she did in America in like the hood and like American society, but it's also applicable like kind of worldwide. But for example, talking about like healthcare, that's something that's very different in the UK, and how it affects black women and people of colour is also different. For example, we have the NHS, the National Health Service. We have free healthcare. We're very, very fortunate, even though the government's doing its best to destroy it. It's one thing that we don't have private. It's not all private, so it's easier to access healthcare, except people of colour tend to be underrepresented. They don't tend to access it as much as white people, and also black people are overrepresented in mental health services and more likely to be sectioned, etc. Or more likely to be diagnosed with certain things than others. So that's like one thing that's in the UK that feels different to how it is in America. And for example, in the UK, we don't have like the hood. Like, it's just different. There is obviously a different version of it. You will have more deprived areas, a lot of council housing, that are more likely to have, ethnic minorities live there. They have like specific areas that you're more likely to have a community of black communities in. And also, for example, gun violence is very different here because you can't just own a gun. You have to like have super like specific licenses and like security and stuff. The people that have guns are farmers, and that's it. But police brutality and police violence does happen. It's just different. So I felt like I was learning stuff, and I was like, yeah, in a lot of agreement with a lot of things, but it just feels different. And it made me really want to read something by a black British woman, and black British feminism, like the British equivalent of this is what I wanted, because this was good. I gave it 4 stars, but I couldn't give it 5 stars because, selfishly, I guess, it didn't feel 100% relevant to me. So yeah, but definitely worth a read. It's insightful and interesting and different. So next, I read a book that I've already done a review about recently called Lucy by Jamaica Kincaid, and I just got like a normal lamp and it just reflects everything. This was an amazing book, 5 stars, novella. Please check out my review because I don't want to talk about it again. It's about a young woman called Lucy who moves from the West Indies to live with a wealthy white family in America. It's set in the past. I don't think I said in my other video. It's not set in like 2021. It's set in like, I guess the 19 something. I don't think it even says it specifically, but they don't have like mobiles, you know, barely even have like cameras. But it's amazing. The best character work I've read like probably ever. Lucy made me think, it made me feel emotional. It was such a good book, 5 stars. Next, I read the 3rd book in the Patternmaster series by Octavia Butler. I have it in this collection of 4 books called Seeds to Harvest, because that's just what this collection is called. But this collection contains all 4 books in the Patternmaster series. Clay's Ark was the 3rd book in the series, and it was really good actually, super interesting. I haven't reviewed the whole series yet. I'm planning on doing a video about it, but it just feels like it's going to take forever to talk through each book and explain my feelings. But it was super interesting. Because I haven't got the other books to talk about now, I'm not going to go through the plot, but it's sci-fi. She's a sci-fi author. Like, I don't know how to explain it. Her work seems to be sci-fi, but quite grounded sci-fi. You're not like in space, at least in this series. You're on Earth, or an alternate version of Earth, and a lot of the supernatural sort of sci-fi elements are sort of like, what's it called? I can't remember the word for it. When it's like, it could actually be happening now, but we just don't know about it because it's hidden. Do you know what I mean? Like, there could be people with powers. There could be people with like a parasite that's infecting them and how they behave. We just wouldn't know. But this book was interesting. It was about a family that get kidnapped by people who have got an alien disease that is trying to spread, but they are trying to contain it. But they do kidnap this family, and stuff happens, and it's super interesting, quite graphic in some parts. There's definitely a trigger warning with this book. But it was good. It was my favourite book of the series, actually. I have finished the series now. But after that, I read Wages Paid. I really want to say Wages Page, because I don't know. I just can't do it. Wages Paid. I recently released a review of this as well. This is a novella. It is really, really interesting. The whole story takes place on one day on a slave plantation in Jamaica, and it's from the perspectives of 5 people, 1 being the slave owner and 4 being different enslaved people that live and work on the plantation, all with varying degrees of like hierarchical varying degrees of power. They have quite high up positions on the plantation, and it's messy. It gets messy, this plot. It's really interesting, so well done. 4 stars, probably 4.5 stars. I think I said 4 stars in my review, but it's actually about 4.5. It's not perfect, but it's not far off. After I read Wages Paid, I read the last book in the Patternmaster series, called Patternmaster. What's interesting is she actually wrote Patternmaster first, and then wrote the other stories afterwards, but not in chronological order. So even though Patternmaster is the last book in the story, like chronologically, it was her first written book. And I know some people say that you can tell like the quality is not as good as her other stuff, but I actually quite enjoyed this one. There are these diseased monsters called Clayarks, from the previous book, and there are people that have sort of these supernatural abilities, mind reading, sort of like telepathy. Is that mind reading? Yeah, telepathy. And they're kind of these 2 clans of people who have basically taken over the earth are at war, and stuff happens. Basically, there's not much about the war itself. It's more about like a specific person trying to attain some goal. But it was interesting. It's good. It was what was really interesting about this book was it's strange that she wrote it first, and each story you could actually read as a standalone, but they are better, and you feel like you get a complete picture when you read them all, and they take place across like a timeline, like the one takes place like hundreds of years in the past, and then this book takes place like in the future, I think, or like now. Did it say? At one point it's like, I'm sure one of the years in one of the books is like 2021, and I was like, pfft. But it takes place like future. So yeah, interesting. I think I've butchered any explanation of this, but It's an interesting story and concept. So next I listened to the audiobook of Foe by Iain Reid. Whoa, so good. Iain Reid is so good. I'm Thinking of Ending Things is amazing, and Foe is really, really good. It's amazing too. I felt really frustrated after finishing this book and reading other people's reviews and seeing how many people complained that this wasn't like I'm Thinking of Ending Things. What did you expect? Of course, it's not like I'm Thinking of Ending Things. It isn't the same book. It's a different book. I'm Thinking of Ending Things is unique, and that part of why it's so good is because it was so unique. So if this book was like that, I'm Thinking of Ending Things wouldn't be so special because it wouldn't be unique anymore. Anyway, Foe is, I guess, is set the book he wrote afterwards, maybe, and it's really, really, really good. So Foe is about a couple that live quite isolated on a farm. Is it a farm? It's not a farm, but they live in the countryside, and they get visited by a man from the government who tells them that the husband, whose name I can't remember now, has won the lottery to go to space and work on a space thing, something in space, some sort of like satellite thing, I don't know, some sort of space thing basically. And they're like, what? Like, do I have a choice? Obviously they don't have a choice because it's the government. And this man like leaves and then comes back in a couple of years, and then eventually it's like getting closer and closer to the time that the husband has to leave, and you see like the cracks in their relationships, and eventually they are offered to have a synthetic robot sort of replacement husband to look after the wife, who's called, his nickname is Hen, so I remember her name, Hen, to look after her while he's gone, because he's going to be gone for a few years, he's going to be gone for a while. So that's years of her life where she's going to be without him on her own, and it causes a lot of tension. And throughout the story, there's something not right, and I think one thing Iain Reid does really well is to make you feel like something's not right, and you're never quite sure entirely what it is. And by the end of it, I can kind of figure out the twist, but there's obviously a twist. But just like I'm Thinking of Ending Things, this is not as creepy at all. I'm Thinking of Ending Things like had my skin crawling the entire time, but this still had my feeling that something was like, something's not right, something's a bit sinister, what is going on? And yeah, well worth the read. It's not the same as I'm Thinking of Ending Things. It's probably not as good either. It's not as creepy, it's not as like horrific, but it's still really good. I could imagine this being turned into a film and being really good. I gave Foe 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It definitely needs more credit than it's given. He's a good writer. He knows how to write something suspenseful and creepy and to make you feel like things aren't okay and you don't know why. That's great horror. So after that, I read Recitative. I don't speak French, so Recitative by Toni Morrison. It is a short story that I think it's the only short story she's ever written. This looks weird because I printed it. It's available for free online. The wonderful Helene from Books by Lanes, I think that's how you say her username, actually did a review of this book much better than anything I could ever do, and she left the link for the Google Docs of the story because it is freely available online. You could buy it within like an anthology of short stories, but if you want it for free, it's only officially like 19 pages on Goodreads or whatever, so it's super quick. And this like blew my mind. This is definitely 5 stars. It blew my mind. It's about 2 girls who meet at a children's home, and it like covers like several encounters as they meet when they're kids and they separated, and then they meet again as teens and they're separated, and they meet again as like adults and separated, and it's like it's covering their encounters, and it was so interesting. And it's one thing it does is that it doesn't tell you the race of the girls, but you know that one is black and one is white, but you don't know which one's which, and you end up getting so focused on figuring out who's who, because the way it's written it could be either, but depending on which one it is, it changes the story, or changes how you feel about the story and how you feel about the characters. It's super interesting, and you end up missing the point. And because you're so focused on race, and we have this need to feel able to identify people, and I know that for me, my empathy towards the characters switched depending on which one I thought was the more marginalised one, and that's like a weird bias and like something that I don't know, it just like opened my eyes a bit, and you end up end up getting so distracted that you miss a really important part of the plot and another character that doesn't get attention paid to her because of that. I've got 2 more books to talk about. One, it was an audiobook. I listened to The Devil all the time. I read it because I really want to watch the film. I haven't got around to watching it yet. This book was gritty and interesting, and it's about these characters and how their lives intertwine, and it is super dark and super gritty. It's a horror or thriller. I don't know. It's super dark, super gritty, super gory in places. It's really interesting, but I only gave it 3 stars, but that's because I really enjoyed it, but it didn't grip me. I didn't feel super motivated to find out what was going on. I wasn't listening to it and thinking, oh my god, I need to know what's happening next. I just kind of felt kind of meh about it, and when it finished I was like, that's kind of cool. And that's kind of my reaction. So to me, that's just a 3-star. And the final book I read in February was An Unkindness of Ghosts by Rivers Solomon. I remember, I'm realising that I keep forgetting to the names of the authors of the books that I'm reviewing. But An Unkindness of Ghosts is a sci-fi novel where everyone lives on this big space boat called Matilda. And it's focused from the perspective of a young person called Asta. And the way this book works is it kind of represents like old Southern America with the divide between races, where the white people are in control and they live on the top decks of the boat, and the darker skinned people live in the bottom decks, lower decks, and each deck has its own like culture and its own language, and the way they view race and it's not race, by the way they view gender is very different. It's super interesting. This book follows Asta as she tries to find out what happened to her mum, who supposedly took her own life when Asta was a baby. Asta is a super interesting character. I do have a video planned where I talk about this a little bit more, so I'm going to talk about loads now. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it, but my only criticism is that it tries to do too much in too few pages. I think it's like, what, 300 pages? Just under 350 pages. And it tries to do far too much. It tries to do like the whole race divide, and like revolution, gender, sexuality, trauma, abuse, sexual trauma, the whole like destroying the earth, trying to find a new home, you know. It tries to do so much, and I just don't think it has enough pages. And if some things feel rushed or brushed over, and I think it's super interesting though, and it's well worth the read. You'll be transported to this new horrific place. And it's really, really good. Trigger warnings though for sexual assault, just to be aware. So that are all the books I read those are all the books that I read in January and February. I hope you enjoyed. I'm going to try and keep up with monthly wrap-ups, even if I'm having a bit of a tough month. I'm going to try and keep them up. Okay. Hope you enjoyed. Happy reading. I'll see you around.